know some other folks have said this over the course of the conference, but I would just start with a few acknowledgments, starting with the influence group. Michael and Nicole and the whole entire influence team has just been incredible. I just want to thank them so much for having me, but also just how important this event is. And the whole format is incredible. I feel like I've got a chance to meet everybody, although I can't see you at all because of the blinding lights. I also want to just quickly say, I've got a lot of respect for a lot of different professions. But boy, oh boy, the folks working in school facilities, that is a tough job right now. And having spent almost the entirety of 2021 working on this report, I can't believe what you guys are doing on the ground and making, ends meet. It really is incredible. I almost want to give you a round of applause, but you guys have our deepest respect and admiration for the work that you do every single day. And I mean that. I think John said it really well yesterday. COVID has made your work so visible, but you've always been doing this work. So anyway, just want to say thanks to everybody. John, another shout out to Albuquerque. I started my public education out in Albuquerque through about third grade and then jumped over to Virginia. But anyway, fond memories of my elementary school days in Albuquerque. Go Inez. Go Inez, that's right. I got to figure out what the mascot is. Let me jump to the next slide. Oh, that's me. So I'm Jason Hartke. I lead external affairs for IWBI, the International Well Building Institute. I also lead our advocacy efforts. So all our work with policy makers at the national, state, and local levels. It's great to be here. It's great to see. I got kind of pulled over into my golf session with all the higher ed folks. So University of Minnesota and John, a couple other universities. Anyway, so I missed you guys playing golf. I wanted to just tell you a little bit. Well, somebody on our team was a ringer. Oh my goodness. I mean, he was just killing it. Anyway, I want to tell you a little bit about IWBI. This is not a session about IWBI and the work that we do. If you want to learn more about us, I highly recommend, if you want to make your school safer and use Esther Funds in a really effective way, I would recommend that you talk to Angela Spangler, my colleague here today. She is awesome. She has done a lot of outreach to both of these communities, higher ed and K-12 schools. She knows well backwards and forwards. She's helped whole school districts like Fairfax County take their entire, every one of their schools through some of our programs during the midst of COVID. So again, to get into the meat and potatoes of what we do, I would recommend touching base with Angela. But we do have this comprehensive approach. We are trying to work to lead a movement to transform health and well-being in our buildings, in our organizations, and in our communities. Next slide. That's me again. Sorry. This is taking some getting used to. We do that through the Well Building Standard. This is a certification system very analogous to LEED. While LEED, I was at USGBC for 10 years, while the LEED rebuilding rating system focuses on sustainability and climate, WELL is exclusively focused on human health. And it really is a comprehensive program. It's science-backed, it's evidence-based. You can go through every single one of our features in indoor air quality, water quality, thermal comfort. But I really liked how Mike Richter put it yesterday. It's all about human health, human comfort, and human performance. And, that really resonates with the folks, the occupants of your sector, right? I mean, when you're talking about all of us, that's one thing. When you're talking about kids and students, that's another. This makes a big, big difference when you start zeroing in on these strategies that can help improve health and well-being. And in fact, over the last 2 years, we know that it can help protect human health. So just where we've been, I have a really interesting story about this. I've already told quite a few of you this, but it's just the timing. I came on at IWBI the very end of 2019. One of the first things I was doing was writing a press release, this big momentum press release that we had hit the 500 million square foot footprint for WELL around the world. Well, fast forward 18 months later, We are now over 3 billion square feet of real estate around the world. Obviously, there's been a big push. Healthy buildings has gone from a nice to have, frankly, to a must have. But again, this is delivering on the promise of healthy buildings. What that visibility, what was gone from invisible to visible, has made a big difference. The awareness is like Gabriella was saying, radical transparency works because all of us, whether it's parents, but all of us want to see what's going on inside the building. So that's the IWBI spiel. Again, I highly encourage you to touch base with Angela to talk more about what we're doing. So I'm here today to really talk about this report. This has been a year of my life. We've had some incredible partners that we've worked with. The 21st Century School Fund, led by Mary Falardo. I don't know if any of you know her. She is a delight, and she is probably the most preeminent expert on school infrastructure in the country. We also had a chance to work with the National Council on School Facilities. They essentially represent state school facility directors around the country. Juan Morales, who's the head of California's schools and facilities, was one of the main partners that we worked with. Again, great people, great organizations. We had the support of folks who came in early to make sure we could get this done. Our sponsors, I know some of them are here over the course of this conference. Carrie, and I know our friends from Johnson Controls are here. I want to thank them for their support. And we also had over 30 organizations that came on as supporting organizations to make sure that we were getting the word out about what we found in the report. A lot of these groups are schools groups. A4LE, I don't know if you all know them, great group. ASBO, the superintendent's group, the principals group, all of them, and a slew of others. This is not the happy days report briefing. It's a little dreary. The storyline here is it's not just sad, but it's tragic. I mean, what we're seeing in our schools is really unfortunate. This picture, they're playing jump rope with a caution safety piece of tape. There's the top line takeaways that I'll get into, but there's really a much deeper underlying story. Again, this is not necessarily a series of happy report outs. This is the ideal, right? We all have been to these schools that inspire us, and I think every school you walk into should inspire us. There was a school in Arlington County in Northern Virginia. It's a net zero energy school. Every room you go into is incredible. And Jeremy was talking about like the flexible furniture yesterday. It has all sorts of those. I mean, I was in a classroom for like 20 minutes, moving around on the furniture. It's incredible. Have a slide that goes from the second floor to the first floor that the kids take at the end of the school day. This is the aspiration. This is what we think every school should be. And unfortunately, we've all seen all too many schools with conditions like this. We're talking about the basics. We're talking about bathrooms that work. We're talking about roofs that don't leak or fall in. We're talking about basic health and safety, not what we can do in terms of leadership. You start talking about resilience. We had a long conversation about that yesterday morning. Talk about sustainability. It's hard to think about those aspirations when your school looks like this. And so I'm pausing here a little bit because we're going to get into a lot of numbers. And one of my messages is there's a story behind the numbers you're going to hear today, a very important story. These are the type of stories that undergird the statistics that we're going to hear today. I mean, look at these things. Don't have air conditioning, a shortage of working bathrooms, windows that don't fully open. We talked about operable windows. Lead, asbestos, mold. This is one city. You can't say that these aren't things that you're seeing all across the country, in your district, in your state, certainly. But this is ubiquitous. This is a huge challenge. And I wanted to just put this. These are some recent statements. This was in a recent article, but I wanted to put this out there. Just again, we've been to these schools, And you know these schools much better than I do, but these are the types of problems they're facing when we don't invest in our schools. So that is the thesis of what we found. There's been a severe and chronic underinvestment in school facilities. Why does it matter? I've talked a little bit about that. The aspirations, the importance of both educational opportunity, but equal education. The impact on health for students and administrators and teachers. All of this is so important that our facilities are in good shape and that we are able to aspire to some of those other things on the climate resilience and health side. So here's where we are. This is the stop and pause moment. These statistics are staggering. I mean, when we were working the numbers with Mary and getting all the data, you almost want to fall back. This is not just $85 billion one fell swoop that we're underinvesting in our school facilities. This is $85 billion every single year. This is a hole that we're digging and that we continue to dig deeper. What's the old line? So this is not good. Obviously, we've got $57 billion on the capital side, and we've got $27 billion on the operations and maintenance side. This is the national snapshot. We've got statistics across every state in the union. Illinois, we had friends from Chicago speak. They're facing a $2.2 billion underinvestment. New York, a $5.3 billion underinvestment. New Mexico, $500 million gap. Tennessee, friends from Tennessee talking yesterday, $2.3 billion. Iowa, $1 billion gap. There's basically the entire country. I think the only place that didn't have a infrastructure investment gap was Washington, D.C. As it turns out. And there's another story. Who's here? Folks still here from Texas? Texas has a really interesting story. Of course, Austin. Texas has only got a gap of 200 million, right? So let me just jump ahead here. It's a big difference to another big state like California, which is facing an nearly $11 billion investment gap in capital investment as well as operations and maintenance. And again, this is how it breaks down. I threw this slide in. I wish I had this for every other state that's relevant here. We'll make sure to direct you to where you can see this. It's really important. I'm going to get into some other state figures on this, but because again, there's an underlying story, not just for the national picture, but for every single state. All right, so we've done this report before. The first time we did it was with the Center for Green Schools at U.S. Green Building Council. It was a lot of the same actors. Some of us from IWBI were at USGBC at the time. And the gap showed that was uncovered was $46 billion every single year. So we've seen an 85% jump to the 85 billion. Mary likes to make sure, Mary Filardo was lead researcher on this. She likes to make sure to point out that, in terms of adjusted for inflation, that's only 25 billion increase. So be it. We talk a lot about why this is. This report had more schools, so we jumped up in terms of square footage from 7.5 billion to 8.1. A couple other factors here. Obviously, the cost of school construction is up. Maybe it's not up enough in terms of our model from what I've heard over the last 48 hours. I think the modeling on this is very conservative. So, we're looking at, in some respects, the best case scenario. But the other reason that it's not on this slide, and I remember saying this when the slide was developed, why the gap is growing, at least from the last report to now, it's growing because we haven't done much differently, right? And I'm not talking about you guys, so I'll get to that what I mean by that, that we haven't really changed the game as it relates to how we invest in schools, how we fund schools. Sorry. All right, so just jumping ahead, The report gets into a lot of what we're seeing in terms of the disparities of this funding. The next 3 slides are really based on how school facilities are paid for. This is stuff that you all know backwards and forwards. But localities cover 77% of the costs of school facilities. States are about 22%. That varies wildly. I think there's maybe 8 or what's this, certain 12 states that don't do anything, and then there's about 8 states that do about half. Anyway, so that state funding is very variable. And then you got the good old feds. They come in just over 1%, and almost all of that funding, I think, in fact, all of that funding is related to recovery after disaster. So that's not anything that any of you could ever plan on. It's, hey, if a certain jurisdiction gets hit really hard, states, then the feds will come in and help support schools. Another alarming statistic as it relates to, the local federal sharing of cost here. State funding is trending down. That's a big dip over the last 11 years, going from 16.4 billion down to 9.7 billion. So if you guys are feeling squeezed in your state and maybe not getting as much from your state, this is why. The funding is dropping pretty significantly, and it continues to drop, according to the report. This is a really important slide, and again, I don't know if you guys have digested it this way, but it's really interesting. The debt load of school districts is really high. We're talking about just about $500 billion. Is that right? $500 billion, right? That is right. And per student, that's a debt load of $11,000. That's big. You're paying interest, right? $20 billion in fiscal year 2019. So again, just in terms of the finances of where we are already, school districts at the local level are doing their part. There's no question about it. It's how do we get these other actors to engage? I mean, that's, again, it's a little bit of standing on my soapbox, but too bad you guys are going to hear it. I think we all want to twist the federal government's arm on this one. All right, so look, the investment gap in and of itself is a crisis, but the underlying crisis that we found in this report, and this was paving new ground for this year's report, was really looking at what was going on, at a school district level, at the state level, and the disparities in funding. This is not an underinvestment that is, shared equally. It is a very unequal distribution, and there is inequity absolutely rooted into what we're seeing in the funding. So I'll run through these a little bit. We divided the districts in terms of the study. We divided the districts into low poverty districts, medium poverty, and high poverty. And the anticipation walking into this, we didn't know how this was actually going to turn out, is that the low poverty districts would probably have higher spending. The high poverty districts would have lower spending. And we thought there might be a little bit more of a discrepancy, medium might be medium. But in fact, there's a big drop off, and we saw this in a lot of states too, where it's low poverty over here, meaning effectively the wealthier districts, and then everybody else. And again, that's kind of what we're seeing here in terms of maintenance and operations. And of course, in capital improvements. In high poverty districts at the national snapshot spent 37% less per school on capital investments than low poverty districts. And again, it really is, it's a story in part of kind of the haves and the have-nots. There's no kind of middle tiers. It's cut off. And again, this is alarming at the national level, but some of the statistics and what we're seeing when you kind of pull back these layers at the state level is even more alarming. And I'll get into a little bit of that. I wasn't able to make a printout, so I'm gonna have to go over to my computer at the end here, but I did want to go through that. We're also talking about, what this means for people of color. These are they're disproportionately in the high poverty districts, and therefore they're in these schools that have the lowest levels of investment. So again, this is a reason why that when we're talking about equity, we're talking about investment dollars, talking about big federal bipartisan infrastructure packages and even a social infrastructure package like the Biden administration has been talking about since day one. Schools should be on the list. In fact, they should be on the top of the list. There's also a significant discrepancy between what we're seeing in terms of funding by location. So, and again, the state snapshots are, I think, really enlightening here, but rural districts are hurting the most. I think just about every state where you think about the folks that have the least, they're suffering the most in terms of these investments, or rather these underinvestments. And so I wanted to come back to California. If you guys can indulge me just real quick. Wanted to come. So, anybody from Massachusetts? No. Okay. All right. Well, Massachusetts, just to give you a little flavor of this, rural districts in Massachusetts spend 7 times less per school than urban districts. In Florida, we're here in Florida, low poverty districts spend almost double. So again, wealthier districts are spending double per school than high poverty districts. In Georgia, high poverty districts received $3.4 million less per school than low poverty districts. Texas, low poverty districts received more than double per school than high poverty districts. Virginia, low poverty districts receive almost 3 times more funding per school than high poverty districts. Anyway, the list goes on and on. I can, New Mexico, a low poverty district will spend on average $10 million per school. Low poverty district, $3.6 million per school. So these are real issues. There are real discrepancies, real disparities, and again, I think for the first time, at least in a national picture, and then these state snapshots, we're able to see it here. And again, I would really encourage you to think about understanding the dynamic of what's going on in your state. I know that for instance, Albuquerque and across their district, you're looking at those same issues, right? You want to make sure that certain part of the district is not getting favorable treatment, and I think the same is true within state and of course across the country. So what do we take from this? So how do we kind of move forward? We've had historic investment in schools. Well, let me just back up a little bit. And I've mentioned this. I can kind of harp on this, but I think if you're a school district, if you're a state, even at the national level, it's hard to think about how do we really leapfrog into a school that's leading by example on health, or leading by example on climate, and jumping into this aspiration to be net zero energy or climate neutral or climate positive, as they say, when schools are facing so many other issues. And there's so much inequality in terms of the burden of this underinvestment. But if we're going to get there, it really does require all of us. I think the biggest actor that hasn't come to the table yet, of course, is the national government. We've talked a lot about that. But all of these goals that we share around what a school should be, we're falling short given this underinvestment. The report does a really good job. I didn't get into this in the slides, and I think I'm doing okay on time. But the report gets into a whole series of recommendations that are really applicable at the state and local level, across all these opportunities to kind of come together, think through maybe some more innovative ways to solve these issues. I know that we talk about government investment all the time. We have industry partners here today, like Johnson Controls, like some of these other service providers, who can open the doors as it relates to financing. And I think there's a big opportunity ahead to try to leverage private capital. I know that's being done through the energy service company, the ESCO model, and a lot of districts where they're throwing in capital improvements into some of those deals and have done so for many, many years. And maybe some of you have utilized that. But we do have to be much more creative if we're not going to get additional federal dollars. Esther Funds, I think we've kind of beaten this one over the course of the last couple of days. I wanted a quick backup on Esther Funds. Look, your districts have a whole lot of competing priorities beyond facilities. We've talked about the importance of facilities and the challenge that you all face, and it's big. But you're also still competing with all the other things that the pandemic affected in your districts. The schools was structured somewhat similar, where it was awfully discretionary for how LEAs and SEAs were to utilize those funds. And besides the people I told yesterday, how much of those funds do you think were used for facilities back in 2009? Any guesses? All right. Those are quiet bunch this morning.
5%. 5%.
5%. 5% of that $64 billion were spent on facilities. In fact, and then again, it was like a couple of states. It ended up being like really localized. They ended up spending those states. They ended up using like 40, 50% on facilities, and most of it was not. In most states, was not used on facilities, even though grappling with some of these same issues and challenges. So, how you use those funds? Again, it has a stat here. If you were just to apply 15% towards school facilities, that would be $31 billion. Public school districts could reduce the 10-year, $276 billion maintenance gap by 11%. Again, we can close some of these gaps if you're able to use those towards facilities. And again, this is about getting back up to code. This is about getting up to basic health and safety, making sure that everybody's able to walk into those schools like that first picture showed, that inspire us, that inspire our kids, inspire our students. The policy matters. This is what I've been dealing with, again, over the last, and just frankly, some of the most heartbreaking policy efforts I've ever had. The roller coaster that I rode, we had RASA is I don't know how many people are familiar with the Rebuilding and Reopening America's Schools Act. That bill has been introduced for now 2 Congresses. It was $130 billion for schools. We've been waiting for this package that it could get attached to, like an infrastructure bill, again, for about 4 or 5 years. A huge coalition called BASIC, Building America's School Infrastructure Coalition, which includes hundreds of organizations, have been working on this legislation. It would be transformational. And again, we've been really high on getting this done. We thought it would get into the hard infrastructure bill. Republicans position schools as not being hard infrastructure, even though it's the second largest sector of infrastructure, second only to highways, and didn't get into the hard infrastructure bill. That was our first setback. We transitioned into the reconciliation package. We had great news coming out of the House. There was the package included $82 billion, not by accident. Right before the House made its decision, our report came out, saw that there was an $85 billion a year gap. The House put in $82 billion in their package. We've seen that the reconciliation package has been trimmed down, and the entirety of that school funding is now out. So this has been an advocacy roller coaster for many of us. I would encourage everyone to take a look at this article that came out just last week. That we've nixed $100 billion for school modernization from the infrastructure package, and it's not looking great for the reconciliation package. We don't even really know what will happen with reconciliation. It's just a political quagmire and a lot of infighting on the Democratic side. Again, DC speak, that I don't know we need to go down that path. There is still hope. I mean, if you guys want to weigh in, you should tell your federal delegation that schools matter. And this is ultimately what I think this talk is about. where we learn matters. Our school facilities matter. We don't talk enough about schools. We don't talk about how important it is to learning, how important it is to help kids, teachers, administrators. We're in our schools so much of our lives. I think Joe Allen, he's a researcher in Harvard, I think he said that he had a great stat that humans are inside buildings more than some whales are underwater, right? So just give you that. In fact, 90% of our lives are spent inside a building. And I think when a child gets out of high school, they've been in a building about 15% of their lives, or a school building 15% of their lives. So anyway, these facilities matter. They have such a huge impact on health. They have such a huge impact on learning. And we really need to step up and make sure that everybody's doing their fair share. That is the ultimate message. And this is a quote from our CEO on why it's so important for the federal government to step in. I think that's my last slide. All right. Questions? You guys need a drink.
I'm going to come down to you. Anybody who has questions, we just want to make sure we get it on the audio recording. So I'm going to come down to you. Give me 1 second. It's a big room.
In your statement showing the difference and showing the lower amount of funding for lower poverty schools, do you attribute that to the fact that that funding is localized, generated localized, or is it the local governments and other governments around that, the governing bodies that only give them a small amount of money, or is it that they're only able to generate lower amounts?
I think it's predominantly the latter, so it's the structural answer. And even in a lot of jurisdictions, what we're hearing where they're already kind of capped out on bonds, and you guys you're talking about your mill levy and how everybody's kind of jumped in and said, hey, there's been so much more transparency in Albuquerque, we're going to pass the next bond. There's certain jurisdictions, one, they're already, getting less from property taxes, and then two, they're not able to pass the next bond, right? So they're saying, hey, we can't afford any more of these taxes. So I think I attribute it to mostly, again, it's like someone will have to do the regression analysis to figure out what it exactly is. The other big thing, John, which is interesting, there's nobody at the Department of Education. This is something we've been, since my USGBC days, we've been advocating for 15 years. There's nobody at the Department of Education whose job is to understand what's going on in school infrastructure. So this report, the reason why this report is so special is not because our three groups came in and said, hey, because nobody else is doing it. There's nobody else who tracks this information. We've been saying that there needs to be an Office of School Facilities, Department of Education, to understand what's really going on at the state level. In a way, this is an analysis of what's been spent. You guys are doing these other analyses at the local level that could be informing what the Department of Education is doing anyway. So there's a huge data and information gap, and I don't know if that's true or what that picture looks like across states, right? So this data may not be known as let's say the SEA, the equivalent in New Mexico, is making decisions about how to distribute, or allocate dollars across the state, because frankly, not many people are tracking it. And getting the data that we got for this report was half the battle.
Hi. I'm on camera.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation, especially looking at the equity in schools and how the dollars are going across high poverty and low poverty schools. But I was also curious, did you also slice it one tier down, looking at actually the school district themselves? So not just not looking at high poverty schools and low poverty schools, like City of Chicago. Of course, 600 campuses, it's all over the place when it comes to equity and ages of facilities. One thing I was hoping to do, and I hope the district still pushes towards doing at one point, is we were only giving a certain same amount of money per square foot for every school. We were giving 31 cents per square foot for every building in the facility side, which meant that a 100,000 square foot building got $31,000. And of course, there were other ways to fund. But every building, no matter the age, no matter the PTA funding sources they may have in the schools and the families that are wealthy, always seem the exact same. So maybe looking at not just the district themselves, but one tier down from that, how even the strata of the district, how they looked at equity. Because the CPS, we actually had an equity officer. It was like one of the few districts that had that. But again, how the equity officer interacted with department spend was not very clear. So maybe something else to look into.
Yeah, I would love that idea. I think we have aspirations to do that if we do this again. I think we're trying to get this back on a cadence where we could do this maybe every other year. This was the first year where we actually got into the states in terms of what we were seeing by locale, what we were seeing by what we were seeing by kind of high poverty, low poverty, medium poverty, and those other breakdowns. So that we were paving new ground. But we would love to get there. A lot of it's just a matter of getting the data. The reason that we were able to do it at this level was because, frankly, because of NCSF and the school facility directors gave us the data. So it's just a matter of aggregating the data and getting it together. I think we need to get there. I think you're kind of hitting it on the head. One thing that the report gets into, there's a kind of a really good section on it that I would encourage folks to look at. We've seen this come up in the context of maybe inflation, right? Where folks are saying, hey, the dollar's not going quite as far as it used to, even in the context of ESSER, and how you guys are starting to now think through how you invest those dollars. What we found in this report through this data, without question, is that in rural districts, it costs more. The dollar doesn't go as far, and in urban districts. And so, that was again more from a state lens. But if you zero in and you start to think about how you're making these investments, there are so many other factors. This is what you're getting at. There's so many other factors, other variables that really should be put into consideration. I was telling a group of folks I was eating with the other day that there's a kind of a cordoned off group of schools in LAUSD, and I think it's their high poverty district schools, and I don't know if they're all in the same place or they're scattered throughout the district. But there are 100 schools. They average 100 years old. Just that alone is like what? And they have a huge, just to get back up to code. I think that they have it's like a $3-4 billion jump just for those schools, and I think LAUSD has maybe 1,400 school facilities. If my stats are right, so just those 100 schools have a need of 4.5 billion. Anyways, it's huge. And these analyses and these audits, if you will, of what the investment is and what the needs are. I know more of your districts are doing that. I love that in Memphis, right? They said, hey, we measure. The first thing we did was measure, figure out where we are. It's the same is true on this investment side. We need to measure. We need to see what the true issue is at the local level. We've not been able to do that. Maybe one more. Last one, John Bailey.
Hi there. I'm John Bailey. I'm from Chesapeake Schools, and I'm also the CEO and Executive Director for the National School Plan Management Association. The question I have for you is, none of these statistics are unfamiliar to any of us that deal with this every single day, but I didn't hear one correlation, except for the statistics, with learning. There was no mention of the adverse building conditions and the influence of the academic performance in these schools. And maybe with the influence of some of us and what we do for the environments for children, that has to be pushed with the statistical analysis that you're presenting to make it more humanistic for these politicians to understand that there's a 3 to 5% variance in academic achievement in adverse school buildings.
Absolutely.
No question. We actually, I'm remiss. That's my fault, John. We have a whole section in the report. It's not. I focused on the data that we led. We did, in some respects, what I would call like a literature review early in the report that talks about educational opportunity, the linkages between what we're seeing on health, sustainability, and resilience, its connections to student learning. There's been some really pioneering studies as it relates to just very specific factors like indoor air quality and what it does. We've seen those on the commercial building side, right? What it does to productivity. When you make those linkages to educational learning, student learning, it has a huge impact. No, again, it wasn't the primary source data from this report, but we have a whole section in the report that I would encourage everyone to take a look at. It really dives into. That's a great point, and I'm almost embarrassed to say that I forgot to drop the ball on that. It's absolutely in the report, and it really is just to your point how we talk to policymakers about it. And then when you get down to those discrepancies, and you say, okay, this school is getting this amount of spending versus this amount, and then you correlate it back to student learning. That's the whole ballgame. Great last question.